With environmental issues at the forefront of the news agenda, the sustainability of the commercial property industry is increasingly under the spotlight. The European Union's 160 million buildings generate more than 40% of the total CO2 emissions.
I've seen in the UK a tremendous change in the last 12 months, and I can't go to a design team meeting now when sustainability, particularly environmental sustainability, isn't an issue that needs to be properly addressed in any building specification.
As part of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, building energy rating certificates will become a legal requirement across the EU in April 2009.
And buildings of all sizes and types will require EPCs, both domestic and non-domestic buildings, so it's coming quickly.
As the energy rating certificates become part of due diligence, stakeholders must decide on how best to maximise asset value. And with an estimated 195 million square metres of office space over 5 years old across the EU, it's a challenge many will have to face.
Generally, the EU is varied in its readiness for the energy ratings. I would say some countries are very prepared and some less so, but possibly more important than their preparedness is actually how prepared investors are for the differences between one member state to the next. From the work that we've done across 7 countries, we can see that the costs involved are different, the way assessors are going to be trained are different, the timings are different. Everything that investors need to be thinking about changes from one country to the next.
The key thing is, in terms of buying and selling and leasing, how visible energy efficiency will be in the marketplace for the first time.
EU member states are adopting differing approaches to introducing the new directives. Jones Lang LaSalle's research suggests varying progress across the EU, with some countries finding a more successful approach than others.
We've seen some countries that appear to be adopting the BER in maybe a more practical way than others. So, for example, in Germany, the way the assessors have to be trained is really based on the qualifications to a great extent that they already have. So it's not a case of having to go through a whole new raft of training courses, and that makes sense because it should mean that it's faster to bring assessors into the market than it might be in other places. So, for example, in the UK, the guidelines are only now being released as to what the ratings are going to be and how the assessors have to be trained, which potentially on a fairly short time scale into April means that we might have a shortfall.
But for an investor, for example, Prupim and Hermes are quite leading. Hermes, for example, have already made assessments, preliminary assessments of EPC ratings for all of their directly owned stock, and they're just waiting now for the government to finalise what an A will be and what a G will be, i.e. what the divisions will be between the boundaries. But using the agreed methodology, they already know preliminarily how well their buildings will perform, so they're very ready compared to others.
The research showed occupiers and developers have reacted well to the directive, showing a willingness to produce and lease more energy-efficient properties.
For occupiers, the energy rating means that they can choose much more easily between one building and the next, depending on how sustainable it is in energy terms. And there are certainly some occupiers, such as government occupiers, that are saying they will only occupy buildings over certain ratings. This will ultimately impact the lettability of buildings, and we would expect major corporates to approach their leasing in the same way.
The study found that of all industry groups, it was investors who were the least concerned by the new legislation. But with the new ratings creating a possible value differential, a loss in value may only be realised when the asset is on the market.
So for investors, if the lettability is impacted, it may impact their rents, and it will impact the liquidity of the building and ultimately the value of the building. So we could expect over time that a two-tier market could emerge.
While costs for assessing a standard 20,000 square metre office building will vary, from €2,000 in the Netherlands up to €4,000 in the UK, the BER should be seen as an opportunity for some strategic decision making.
It's a case of prioritising portfolios, and for those that can manage that in-house, then that's great, but certainly there's quite a lot of information and management and metrics and technical advice that can be provided to help property stakeholders make the right decisions and to be prepared as the building energy ratings come into effect.
While stakeholders must decide whether to redevelop, sell their stock or take no action at all, failure to make an informed decision could be costly.
The risks of taking no action are partly those of reputation. Who would want to own, lease, occupy, manage a G-rated building? So there will be some reputational aspects there. And if that starts to feed through to valuation and to leasability, clearly those are the risks.
Those who can anticipate changes, those who can take the bare legal requirements and add a margin to them will be the ones that will proffer, because targets and standards are changing constantly.